Today's MysTech webinar adds significantly to our base from our 2023 theme of sound resonance with this offering by artist Tobias K, who will speak about his work in the field of sounding bowls. I recently met Tobias in person for the first time this past March. Tobias had been instrumental in arranging for a MysTech speaking tour to come to King Arthur's Tintagel site on the coast of Wales.
Cornwall.
Cornwall, thank you. Yes, I did. Thank you. We rented for several days an entire youth hostel. That was absolutely fantastic. And in there, we were able to build community. And one of the highlights for me was to experience Tobias's sounding bowls, which he played first in our meeting room and then within Merlin's cave. These sounds touch people deeply. The bowl emits an extraordinary harmonic resonance. It has been said that such resonance initiated healing in places one had thought was not possible. The question naturally arises, how, Tobias, did you find your way into making these remarkable sounding bowls? Here is how Tobias answered. When I first began making bowls in 1978, I found the process so satisfying that everything else went by the wayside. All my creative energy went into exploring bowl forms. The curve of the wall became the poem, the song of the bowl's presence. For me, the bowl is an allegory of the human soul with its inner space. Its rim or face is projected out to society, an image partially seen and known and partially unknown, for under its surface it connects still with the natural world from whence it came. End of his quote. So if after this talk you wish to learn more, and I hope you do, his website is soundingbowls, all one word, .com. You will find there some of his upcoming workshops that he offers. So now, with much warmth and joy and appreciation, I pass this over to you, dear Tobias, my friend, for today's webinar. So Tobias, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Lovely. Maybe I'll bring the camera a little bit closer, actually. I think that should work without losing too much of what I want to show you. And I'm going to start with some sound because this is as much about experience as it is about information. I will be putting over plenty of information, but for the moment, just get the sound. So the idea of first fitting a string inside below the surface of a wooden bowl was given to me as an image in a meditation in 1986. prior to that, I'd begun to notice that certain curves, which I was employing purely as a sculptor, certain curves in which I sought the balance between and between the uplifting experience available from design and the sort of the compassionate experience. You know, too much compassion becomes soggy. Too much enthusiasm lacks grounding. So how do you balance the down movement and the up movement just within a turned form, yeah, where half of everything is round anyway, so you've just got a line. So looking for forms which had that balance of uplift and softness, groundedness, I began to find acoustic sounds coming, acoustic responses coming from within that form. So kind of the peak moment was when I was polishing a bowl and checking it for if there was any tiny defects in the surface, so my focus was right inside the bowl. And a lorry went past the workshop, a truck as you Americans like to call it, a big noisy vehicle, and it went but in the bowl the sound came out as whoa. So it took a mechanical harsh sound and turned it into a musical warm sound, and I thought, wow, something has to happen with this. But what, I didn't really know until one evening I was trying to meditate on the side of my bed, you know, in the evening, and this image of a bowl with a string stretched inside it appeared in front of me, and I went, go away, I'm meditating, and tried to go back to the mantra. And it came back again. I thought, okay, actually this is worth breaking the meditation for. This is the answer that I've been looking for. So I started fitting strings to bowls, and over a period of 20 or so, playing with the ideas, working with the images, I got the messages very clearly that this is a balance between sculpture and music. It's not just a musical instrument, it's not just a sounding sculpture. This has to be a balance between music and visual beauty. And feeling guided, feeling as if more than just the beings that had first brought me that image and wanted this instrument to come into the world, feeling as if departed friends, my grandmother, great aunt, were on the case with me, I started developing and discovering ways to hold a string within a bowl to cause it to really sing and to keep it in tune. And what eventually transpired was a bowl which is incredibly thick in the bottom, incredibly thin in the bottom. A bright light would actually show through there. I didn't prepare you for that, but it's about 1.52 mil thick, that one. Yeah? And then it slowly gets thicker as it goes out until it's very, very broad here, so you've got a strong rim to hold the tension of the strings, and each one of those strings might have 100 pounds of tension on it. So that tension needs to be held, and the thick rim then transmutes into a thinner and thinner and thinner wood until it's very thin at the bottom. And the combination of that thickness gradation and this curve, which I developed artistically and later discovered was a Fibonacci spiral curve, those have the quality of making a sound more beautiful. Any sound that comes into the bowl is beautified by this curve. And then when you put tuned strings across there as well, that beautifies it further. It picks up the harmonics in that sound and gives them a new a new strength. Yeah. So I've got a crib sheet on the floor here, so I'll look down from time to time and see what I need to talk about next. Yeah. Yes. So after a bit I began to realise also that something quite special had happened here, in as much as the circle has always been the feminine archetype. It's the cosmic feminine. Yeah? And then when you put straight lines across that, tense straight lines, that's really the sword of Michael, the cosmic masculine. Yeah. So you've got, and the masculine and feminine very easily come into conflict in reality, in the world, in our manifestation of the everyday world. So to have an object in which the cosmic masculine, which we all recognize unconsciously, we all feel it as a real presence, and the cosmic feminine come into harmony, touches something in the soul just by the idea, and causes a relaxation, a sense of celebration, this works, this is possible, this can happen. And there are probably hundreds of examples now. I've seen it dozens of times, and I've heard it from therapists all again and again and again, that when somebody sees a sounding bowl, just seeing it can be enough for people to actually weep. I would say burst into tears, but not sobbing, but definitely, tears running from the eyes. Yeah? And you see even more often that their face goes soft and slightly pinker. So already the blood has come to the surface. Yeah, the emotions are there, and sometimes, as I say, dozens of times I've seen it, that brings tears to people's eyes. But I think that the harmony between the masculine and the feminine is part of it. Another part of it is the craftsmanship, but I'll get on to that later. The fact that love has been put into craftsmanship is incredibly powerful. So after about 20 or so, these bowls started going into therapeutic use, and the NHS, Britain's National Health Service, started buying them. They became my best customer. The first one they bought was for a hospice, and the feedback started straight away. This is really having an effect that's profound. So the music therapist in the hospice said, we have to have a conference on this. But neither of us had ever organised a conference before. We had a little gathering, but it really, later on he started organising proper conferences and invited me to show at them. And sounding bowls took off. They got used then in all kinds of different NHS settings. But it was always particularly hospices, psychiatric care, children with special needs, and trauma work that sounding bowls have been most helpful with. So before I started putting strings on bowls, my work was selling in galleries around the country, occasionally international exhibitions, galleries around the world. I'd already, no, don't need to. So the difference is this, that the work I was selling before I started making it into instruments was going to rich people for display as part of the beauty of their life. Yeah, and you can see how Steiner says that all of the arts have been Lucifer inspired. Yeah, if you look at even the great paintings of the medieval painters, they were being bought by bankers. And these guys were being bankrolled by, the power of the church and the power of money and so on. Yeah. So the self-indulgence involved in that underlines the fact that Lucifer is involved in inspiring even great paintings of Christ and Mary and so on. There's a Luciferic element in there. And Sinus started to say, in the future it will be possible for an art form to be inspired by Christ. And that this has happened in the late 20th century is visible in the way certain artists are much more interested in the therapeutic effect of their art than they are in getting rich from it. Yeah. Obviously these aren't the ones that the big galleries vaunt and the newspapers talk about, because they are a Luciferic, Ahrimanic organization, and when you really start to work for Christ, your work goes out into the world and it has effect in people's lives, but it doesn't get shouted about in quite the same way. So the sounding bowls were, for me, the first example I saw of how art then went into hospitals, and later on I heard more and more about how certain artists specialized in paintings for hospitals or decorating ceilings of rooms where they cut people up. Sorry, what's that? Surgeries, and so on. You know, so that the therapeutic effect of the art really becomes the primary goal. And sounding bowls are, for me, the first example of that. So. I will show you lots more. So as the next one, let's turn to this bowl here. I don't have nearly as many as I'd like to show you. Some are very small, you know, just a handful, and you can reach the center with your thumbs and play the notes just like this, you know. And I like these little ones, and some of them are really big. Here's a medium large one. Yeah, and here you see we've got 2 layers of strings. Ooh, this is the one I didn't tune yet, so I'll just show you for the moment. I've got a bigger one later with this cross pattern of strings. Yeah, so you see how one set of strings is above the other set. Yeah, I can get my hand here under the top set of strings and over the lower set of strings. And the result is that when you play one side with one hand and one side with the other hand, you get a very rich harmonic effect. The overtones are fantastic. It always reminds me of how the field of bluebells, you know, each flower is blue, but there's a sort of a purple haze hanging over the field of bluebells. Overtones in music are like that. It's a whole other world emerges when the notes come together that isn't there in each note. Yeah, and these bridging bowls are very strong at creating overtone patterns. Then the other thing with the bridging bowls is that the first one I made had dark wood on one side and light wood on the other side. It was the same ash tree, but the center of the tree had much darker wood. It happens a lot in English ash trees that the center contains a symbiotic fungus that works with the tree but darkens the wood in the center, and the outside has light wood. Yeah? So being taken from a large tree, this bowl is approximately half and half dark and light wood. So on the light wood I put dark pegs, and on the dark wood I put light pegs, just for the visual contrast, and only noticed afterwards that what happens then is that the strings you play on the dark side are rooted in the light, and the strings you play on the light side are rooted in the dark. And it really emphasizes how light and dark are needed to create harmony. You need to go into the light and the dark to be with and to find, to create harmony. So the next point I'd like to make, yes, there's something about this Fibonacci curve that causes overtones in a very special sequence. Any note you play on any instrument will have overtones. If you create a pure note in a computer, it's a very unpleasant sound if it's only got one frequency in it. But even if you do that, that note then bounces off the ceiling and the walls and every object in there and starts to create overtones. Yeah? So every note we hear has got overtones in it. And the more you purify the note, the less pleasant it becomes. And some overtones are harmonic and some overtones are dissonant. And the quality of a note depends on the relationship between the dissonant and harmonious overtones. It's like every experience in life. Some experiences challenge us and some experiences support us, and we need both. And nearly every experience is a mix of challenge and support. Yeah? And the harmonics are also, the harmonious overtones are like supportive sounds, and the dissonant ones are like challenging sounds. And rock music specializes in creating lots of dissonant overtones, which gets people all like this, you know, and they really feel if they've got that happening inside them anyway, they identify with rock music. Yeah? And if we only have harmony, we go to sleep. And if we only have dissonance, we don't wake up either. You know, we go into a world of stress rather than finding harmonious relationships with the world. But there's something about the harmonic series in sounding bowls that seems to be particularly therapeutic. And I will give you endless examples shortly, but let's listen to this one. I thought I'd tuned that, but maybe not perfectly. Also, what I want you to notice is that this one's much deeper than the first one I played you. Yeah, and this one here has a wide, fairly flat rim, just a slight wave curve to it, whereas this one's got an even wider and fully curved rim. There's no sharp edge where the outside meets the inside. Yeah, that just flows over. The outside becomes the top. Whereas here there's a sharp and distinct edge. You've got the outside, you've got the rim, and you've got the inside as three separate things. Yeah? Here the inside turns back on itself, so you can put your finger up under the rim, and it's actually a very, very light piece of wood. Because it's so thin in the bottom, it's not the wood that's light, there's just not much of it left. Yeah? It's formed into a very strong structure so that it doesn't need much material. And as I say, you can put your finger up under here, so it's actually up under the rim. Yeah? So there's part of this bowl that can never be seen. It can be felt but not seen. And that is how human feelings are. Some of our feelings we can understand and we can look at and we can analyze, and some of our feelings we can only feel. Yeah? So this bowl then becomes called the heart bowl. As you know, there are 6 types of sounding bowls. You've probably seen that on my website already. This one's called a melody bowl, the one with the crossing over strings, because it has the light and the dark, is called the bridging bowl. It bridges the light and the dark. And this one, the heart bowl, is the lightest. It has fewer strings because the rim comes in further, but it has the richest, softest, most engaging tone. So if you want to work really intimately with a bowl, the heart bowl is ideal for that. And if you want to work with the balance of light and dark in life, then the bridging bowl is great for that. And if you want to play tunes, then the melody bowl, because the melody bowl is the only one with parallel strings. Yeah, and stopping here allows us to have the low note at the bottom and the high note at the top. All the other designs have the low note in the middle, yeah, and then they go up sequentially, or rather alternatingly, like an African instrument. They have alternate tunings. So from there, harmonic. The question of the harmonics in the sounding bowl is something that I don't know the physics of, but I think it's a very powerful ingredient in the healing nature of the sounding bowl music. It's why people react so strongly. It's why we get these stories from the NHS. It's why Cambridge University decided to investigate what's happening with sounding bowls, because people respond to sounding bowls, and I think it's got something to do with the visuals and a lot to do with the sound of them, the harmonics. Yeah, this rich overtone mix. So the Cambridge University decided to investigate what was happening at a high security hospital. I'm not supposed to name it. Yeah, there's a few high security psychiatric hospitals in the UK where people who've got so mixed up and so filled with pain that they've done terrible things get cared for. Whether these people ever recover is quite another story, but many of them spend years in there. And a music therapist came to one of the first conferences that this hospice music therapist organized, and she said, I want one of those sounding bowls. and she managed to get her sponsor to pay for it. They've now got 3 sounding bowls in that department. And she said when that first one came in, the client relationships just began to change. She said one guy, I'd spent 15 years working with him, and in all that time he had not shown any emotion. And in his 3rd session with the sounding bowl, he broke down, he burst into tears. So there was something really profound here. And that music therapist in Cambridge University did this trial with the inmates at this hospital. Patients, clients, music therapists call them. They don't name them as anything other than people that they are working with, clients. So the clients of that music therapist, they did this trial with them, and they found that the sounding bowls were more effective than any other handheld instrument. Years later, the head of music therapy research at Cambridge University said to me, yeah, wherever a sounding bowl comes into a situation, everybody just goes deeper. The whole emotional tone of the interaction goes deeper. Yeah. She used to invite me to all her conferences. It was really nice. Yeah. So other places that they've been used in the NHS is children with special needs is one. Yeah. And again, from 2 or 3 separate music therapists, I heard a story like this, that until they got their sounding bowl, their relationship with this child or that child, particularly children with advanced autism, was that the child would just ignore the therapist. They would put up with their 10 minutes or 15 minutes of music therapy, maybe conceding to bang a triangle or hit a note on a piano if they're lucky, yeah, or just not take as little notice as possible. But there's something about the sounding bowl that the children tend to gravitate towards it. So when it first comes into the mix, the music therapist will put it where the child can easily reach it from their seat. Child comes in, sits down, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but children with advanced autism, they have this way of moving that you almost can't see them move until they've already done it. So he's sitting there next to the bowl, and then boom, the bowl's on the lap, and it's there, and it's upside down. So the back of the sounding bowl is texture carved. You can just about see here these little carved. So we go chip, 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 and just create this texture, a harmonious pattern, like ripples on water. Like when the wind passes over the water. So this bit is smooth, and then this bit is textured, and this bit is smooth again. And the relationship between the textured wood and the smooth wood is a little bit like the relationship between sound and silence. Yeah. So for the listening fingers, to have the bowl upside down and just slide your fingers across it, it brings not just autistic children, but anybody who is dissociated tends to come into their touch before they come into sound or sight. Yeah. So they'll use sound or sight, but they will explore with touch. So we texture most of the bowls these days in order to provide that extra ingredient for people, dissociated people. Autism is another, dementia is another situation. Advanced dementia, people also get dissociated. Yeah? And in psychiatric hospitals, some people are very dissociated. So he was exploring this for a while, and then boom, bowl's upside down, and he's exploring the other side and feeling the tuning pegs and then feeling the strings, and you can hear this not plucked sound, but as he feels the strings, and he's playing the strings like that and getting the sound, and then eventually he plucks it and plays it. And she said he spent 20 minutes exploring a musical instrument. The first time he'd voluntarily reached out to interact with a musical instrument. I'd brought him this, I'd brought him that, persuaded him to do the other, but this time he reached out and engaged with the instrument. And the next time he came and sat next to me. I left a space on the bench, and he came and sat next to me. And again, the therapists say, I built up a relationship with the client through the sounding bowl that I hadn't been able to build up with them before. Yeah. So this opening of the heart is a profound, repeated and extraordinary gift that the sounding bowls are bringing into the world. Yeah. Whether it's people crying, whether it's people able to engage with the instrument where they won't touch anything else, again and again and again. And meditants say, you know, many people choose these just to meditate with, yeah, and you can go really deep just by sitting and playing simple tunes, repetitive tunes, or simple explorations of the sound in the sounding bowl. Yeah. So as I mentioned, people with advanced dementia have also been worked with sounding bowls in different situations, and there's one particular woman in France who has done extraordinary work, and she found, as you probably know, people tend to go one of two directions with dementia. Some people just go in and fall in, and they sit there and might mutter, but they might be completely quiet, and they just take no notice of anything around them. And leading such people out into relationship can be very difficult. And others will go out and they get they pace around the whole time, and they get really upset about that. They're not sure what it is they're supposed to be remembering, but the fact that they can't remember what it is they're supposed to be remembering in itself is upsetting enough. And people like that can even be unintentionally violent. If you try and say, look, come on, it's mealtime now, everybody's sitting down at the table, they have been known very frequently to lash out, and it's a problem. And what this music therapist working with these people found is that if you walk alongside somebody who's pacing and out of themselves in this way, and you play the bowl in the rhythm of their walking, they will nearly always reach out to touch the bowl. And then you play it and they play it with you, and the rhythm slows down as they begin to relax, and you can draw them back into the point where they can hear you and don't feel their need to shut you up because they're too upset inside themselves. They are able to hear and come to the table or whatever it is. Yeah. And the same but opposite, I've got a lovely little video which I'm not allowed to share, unfortunately, but the music therapist sent me, of this woman sitting in a chair, and she's just drawn into herself, and the video starts through the door of the room, and she's saying in French, she's saying Mayday, which means help. Yeah, she's saying help, 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 and she'll sit there all day, every few minutes, going help. But if you come in and say, what can I do for you? She'll just completely ignore you. Help! Yeah. So the therapist comes in, sits down in front of her, pulls up a chair, so this woman's in an easy chair, she sits down in front of her in another chair, and puts a bowl partly on her lap, mostly on the therapist, and partly on this woman's, touching this woman's lap, and she starts playing, you know, like the help sound. But harmonizing, taking that mood and making music out of it, you know? And the woman looks up and goes, oh, oh. And as she plays, more and more the sounds of distress become sounds of interest, sounds of enjoyment, sounds of content, sounds of being landed in this moment, in this experience. And eventually over days she even gets her to play the high strings and she plays the low strings. So the girl, you know, the woman plucks and she goes, yeah, and they begin to create music between them. Yeah. This has a profound effect on people who are lost in this situation, and it has a profound effect in the whole home because it changes the mood. It makes everything easier for the nurses, and for the other patients as well. You know, if you're sitting in a room with somebody who's making distress sounds the whole time, it's exceedingly hard to be there yourself. You know? So it really has. There's a whole magazine article on my website now which references some of these and talks about the different situations in which sounding bowls and different techniques used with sounding bowls to bring people to a state of harmony from either being up here or being down there. And for all of us, there's a tendency either to be too introverted or to be too extroverted, and to find the Christ center in us is the most powerful thing we can do for our own development. So, what's next on my list?
May I ask you
Yes, please.
to do something which you did in Tintagel, and that is, while you're playing, to put the human voice into the bowl. I
Yes.
thought that was absolutely extraordinary.
Okay. Let me talk first, just one more, because this woman who's working with the advanced dementia people in France, yeah, she was training other music therapists in using the sounding bowl amongst other things. And one of them took a very little sounding bowl, like this one. I'll show you. This is kind of the baby bowl. This is the children's bowl. This is just 7 strings. 7 strings is really nice. 7 strings is just a simple pentatonic scale. She took a bowl like that into a neonatal intensive care unit. So this is newborn babies who, for one reason or another, have been born with a life-threatening condition, and they are desperately trying to save these babies from following the path downwards. Yeah. And so they're all in incubators. And she would, the doctors would direct her to those with what they called fading vital signs. So the hospital's doing everything they can, but the pulse is getting weaker, the breath is slowly diminishing, the blood pressure is losing, the blood oxygen content is slowly descending. She would put the bowl against the plastic wall of the incubator so that the whole space was resounding, and she would just play her love, her profound sympathy to these children. And the blood pressure would go up, would rise, the heart rate would stabilize, the breathing would deepen and strengthen, the blood oxygen content would rise up, the baby's muscle tone would relax, and again, week after week. She went into this center for 9 months, where every week for just a couple of hours, and hundreds of babies in that time, hundreds of babies made the turn from fading vital signs to in recovery. So there are hundreds of teenagers alive now who wouldn't have been alive without a sounding bowl. But you know what the medical system does? It says, okay, so that's a one-off case, no proof, we can't afford a sounding bowl. Anyway, there we go. Where they go, things happen, and they are going all over the world. Hospitals in Japan, in Australia, all over the USA, all over Europe, and even in Borneo there's a hospital with a sounding bowl in it. They are changing lives. So Andrew's request. one other story before we go on to a little bit more looking back into the bowls themselves. One other story. Old people often get ulcers on their legs. You know, as the spirit rises and fixes and becomes less flexible, less alive in connection with the body begins to die. So sometimes the legs are more dead than the rest of us. Anyway, without the anthroposophic explanations, people get ulcers on their legs. Yeah? And then the bandage on the ulcer, after a few days, of course, that needs to be changed. And if the person with dementia doesn't know why these doctors and nurses are trying to make them sit down or lie on a bed or whatever it is, they will resist. They you know, what are you trying to do to me? Go away. You know, I mean, 5 minutes, as you know, in 2-3 minutes, somebody with dementia has forgotten what you've just told them. So 2 or 3 days later, they've got no idea that they need a medical procedure. Sometimes this means that you have to get 2 or 3 strong orderlies to hold somebody down and maybe even anaesthetize them in order just to change a bandage on the leg. And you know, it might be 2 nurses and 4 people holding down and anaesthetic. Ridiculous amount of basically terrifying input for the person with dementia in order to change a bandage on the leg. And what this music therapist found was that if you play in the rhythm of the person's breathing and sing with the bowl, and here we get on to Andrew's thing of the voice and the bowl together, you sing with the bowl the instructions that are needed. You know, will you listen to me? Yeah. Can I ask you a question, please? Can you listen while I tell you about your knees? Or whatever it is, yeah? People, they will pay attention, yeah? And then you ask them to sit down and you explain that a bandage needs changing, and they usually don't even need any pain medication of any sort because their attention is fully in the music. And if you keep their attention in the music, they don't feel pain. This has even been done with advanced surgeries in a research centre in Germany where they play Mozart and Bach to people, which really structures the whole thinking and get them to really focus. And some people can manage without any pain medication whatsoever while they're having advanced surgery on lower parts of the body. Yeah? So our ability to focus into sound is in itself a profound meditation. Yeah? So when you go into a sound and really allow your attention to be absorbed by a sound, you are entering into the etheric realm. Yeah? Light connects us through the astral with the spiritual. Sound connects us through the etheric with the spiritual. Yeah? And it's a deeper, insensitive, profounder connection. And it's of our time that we are waking up to the etheric. And sound is an excellent way of training your spirit focus to come into the etheric world. And there's perhaps no better way than a sounding bowl. So, yeah, Andrew mentioned that during the Tintagel conference, there were a couple of people who came on that conference who had big sounding bowls. I don't have a big sounding bowl here, really. I mean, I do, but I can't strum on that one. But this one I can strum on. This is a fairly small, medium size. And the way it's tuned is just an arpeggio. In some sound healing systems, the scale is understood to connect to the chakras of the body. So the C scale particularly connects to the, and so you start with C in the base chakra and you come up through the 7 notes to the crown chakra, and then the 8th chakra is like the cosmic I am. It's like the Christ self. This is my eternal self, this is my everyday self, this is my creative self, this is my heart self, and so on. We go down to the base chakra. Yeah. So some people just tone C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, B, A, D, whatever it is, G, F, E, D, C, to cleanse through the chakras. Yeah. So. And I mention that because if you stop at C in the base chakra, what happens if it's C, B, A, D, yeah? If you go on down, you can realize, imagine, activate, intentionally activate the lower chakras of the body. And the major chakras, the 7 central chakras, are only part of our bodily chakra system. Yeah, the joints have all got chakras. So there's important chakras in the knees and the ankles, and then the sole of the foot. And if you go down from the keynote to the 7th, that'd be the knees. The 7th is a cosmic. Steiner describes it as the Saturn interval. It takes us right into the most cosmic, the most celebratory, the most holy relationships. Da, dum, dum. So the 7th, you can imagine how being on your knees, being in prayer, is relevant to the 7th. Yeah, and the 6th into the ankles, and the 5th. Now the 5th is also called the dominant in the scale. The 5th is the hinge point where one scale becomes another. Yeah, and if you rise from the bass note to the 5th and then choose that as your bass note and rise to the next 5th, you can do that 12 times, 12 octaves within the human range of hearing. So if you take the very deepest note that we can hear, not that you can sing, the deepest note that you can hear, you can go 12 octaves from there up to the highest note that human beings can hear. It's interesting, 12, isn't it? And then with the hinge point between these octaves is the 5th. We can get into the maths of music. I could spend all evening, so we won't go any further with that. But the point I'm making is that the 5th is also the principal harmonic. If you double a note, if you halve the string, you get an octave. And if you take 1/3 of a string, you get a 5th above that octave. Yeah. So the principal harmonics are the 8th, and then the 5th, and then the 3rd. So da 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 dum, which is what we got here. Yeah. Bass note. That's a minor 3rd, 5th, and keynote again. Yeah. Those are the principal harmonics within the scale. And then I put in 3 recurrents of the dominant as the very deepest note to help bring people down into the body. Yeah? A lot of sound therapists really encourage people to go out of the body because there's a sense of being in heaven there, yeah, and people feel a lot better for getting the hell out of themselves for a bit, yeah. Whereas what sounding bowls do is they encourage people to come down into the heart. Yeah? And when you go into the heart, you go through your problems rather than going away from them, which you do if you go out of the body. Yeah? But you go through your problems in a harmonious way because you're connecting to Christ. And Christ ultimately is the one who leads us into the healing and the solving of all our problems rather than getting rid of our problems. Yeah? So that's why we got 3 occurrences of the dominant in the bottom there to bring people down into the body, into the sole of the foot. And in a sense, the sole of the foot is a little bit like the heart. The sole of the foot feels the earth. You know, if you walk barefoot on grass, yeah, the foot really wakes up. There's a conversation between the sole of the foot and the soil that both the earth and the body love. So that's the tuning here, that's why that's there. And then, as Andrew says, if you because of this acoustic curve, the Fibonacci spiral in there, if you speak into the bowl, you get a different quality. Even if I damp all the strings, you get a very different quality of sound if I speak to the mic direct or if I speak to it through the bowl. Yeah. So this quality of harmonization that happens in the Fibonacci curve, and then. You can sing sometimes in harmony with the notes and sometimes in dissonance with them, you see. And it creates a rich tapestry of sound. When we first did this at Tintagel, 2 or 3 people who'd been stressed by the difficult journey of getting to Cornwall, hours of driving, not being on time, having forgotten something, dashing back to fetch it, coming again, they just felt completely relaxed and transformed through hearing a couple of sounding bowls and the voice together. So before we go any further, perhaps I should just show you how big some of them do get, because I've got one here at the moment that's just back for a little bit of restoration, and it's about as big as any of them get. Lyre bowls, like that one I was playing, where the strings are just, there's a fan of strings. We do big lyre bowls with 23 strings, like 30-inch bowls, and the sound of those things is so profound. It really moves you, yeah. And then I've got this one here, yeah. And this is also about 30-inch. It's extremely deep. The lyre bowls are shallow and light. This thing is big and quite heavy, yeah. And you can't really just strum it across because it's tuned to a whole scale rather than to an arpeggio. So you're getting a lot of seconds and sevenths and things in there that are dissonant. But if you, now let me just get a stand. If we play it as an instrument rather than just as a sound source, then the quality of the note starts to come out. Get that bass, eh? So that's, as I say, about as big as they get. There's another one here that I'd like to play. No, I'll tell you what I want to talk about next is that another magic in the sounding bowls is that the trees are able to speak through them. You see, most instruments are made of an assemblage of wood. You know, your average guitar's got a spruce soundboard, a rosewood back, you know, and maybe walnut sides or something like that, yeah, and then it's got an ebony neck or ebony laminated onto ash for the neck, and I don't know how many other little bits glued inside it to hold it all together. How can a tree speak through that? Yeah, one, they haven't been invited, and two, they're in a community of voices. A sounding bowl is carved from one continuous piece of wood. The grain goes right through that. It was this way up in the tree, and that was it. It was a piece of wood in a tree growing there as part of the tree's life. And when you carve that to be thin and delicate, the tree's still there, and the tree's still able to speak through it. And the sound of ash is distinct and different from the sound of sycamore. And the sound of sycamore is distinct from that of yew. And you begin to get into the nature of the trees. You can feel the nature of the trees. Yeah? You can feel how sycamore has got mother presence. It's mother goddess. Yeah? If sycamore, it's got big spreading limbs. It's got big spreading 5-pointed leaves. It sends its seeds out far and wide. Yeah? It's got wide roots and so on. You know, sycamore's got this nature. Sycamore, by the way, in England is an acer. It's a maple. Yeah. So if I say sycamore, you could think of sugar maple. It's a very similar sort of tree. Yeah. The platanus, the ones which in America are often called sycamore, that's got a ball fruit rather than a wing fruit. Yeah. It's something, a prickly ball that looks like a medieval mace for hitting people over the heads with. You know. There's this Mars element. If you cut into a platanus, it's got red sap, yeah, almost like blood, so there's this Mars element in the platanus that isn't there in the sycamore. The sycamore is just Jupiter, yeah, and the platanus is like a mix of Jupiter and Saturn together. Sorry, Jupiter and Mars together. Let's see what else we've got here. This walnut. Yeah, walnut stains the walnut fruit husks. You know, they stain you dark. Yeah, and they make the skin look aged. Yeah, so there's something about walnut that has to do with old age and the protectiveness of old age. The tree, if you look at it, is very protective, and around the dark heart of the walnut there's a white band, and again this sense of holding in the secret. And under the fruit, which makes, you know, as I say, people use it as an insecticide also. If you put walnut juice on your arms, you won't get attacked by mosquitoes, yeah, and things like this. So yes, and inside the fruit then of course is the shell, and inside the shell is this brain-like nut. You know, what more symbol of wisdom could you want? Yeah. So the wisdom of the elder is the voice of walnut. Yeah. And so on. There's quite a bit on my website there about the different nature of the different trees. If you go into the drop-down menus, you'll find one on woods. But know this, that trees are kind of the purified thinking of the earth. And the trees want to help human beings as much as you in your thinking want to help the people you love. Yeah. Also, they know, of course, that the success of the whole Earth project depends on human beings. So they really want to help human beings. And the time will come when we become crucial helpers of the trees. But for the moment, the time is for us to listen to the trees. And the sounding bowl is one wonderful way of building up a relationship with a particular tree genus. Yeah. So birch, yeah, has a way of it's emotive. Birch brings you up into your feeling in the same way as the birch tresses move in every little bit of wind, but there's a lightness to a feeling to the birch. So birch doesn't cast hardly any shadow, whereas an oak tree casts a very distinct shadow. So all these things can help you find what sounding bowl will suit you best, and also then help you to build up a relationship with the whole tree realm through one particular genus of tree.
Well, thank you so much, Tobias. I think at this time we could, if you use the Q&A button on the bottom there, or that icon, you can ask questions. And if you don't mind, a bunch of questions have come in
Shoot.
already. There was a question, if you could compare your sounding bowls, their therapeutic, but also their resonant quality to a lyre and to the string instruments that use a sounding box. Is
Yes. Somebody hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. Yes, yes. An open resonator. How many instruments do not have a box resonator? A violin, a guitar, a lyre, they've all got a closed box with holes to let the sound out. The advantage of a box is that it really does cultivate the sound. Yeah? So you get an enriched sound in a box, but not so much of it comes out. Whereas if you've got an open resonator, there's a little bit more that comes out. Yeah? And I mean, the lyre is an excellent instrument, and a lot of therapists use lyres. But when you bring a sounding bowl into the situation, you bring even more emotional availability than you do with a lyre. There's something about, and a lot of lyre therapists have commented on this, and a lot of music therapists who aren't specifically lyre therapists who've tried lyres, and they're helpful. They might have one in their collection, but it just doesn't touch people in quite the same way as a sounding bowl does. And I think that's got a lot to do with having an open resonator. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you think of the 20th century, the change in human consciousness in the 20th century is really that of extreme individuation. At the beginning of the 20th century, most people took up their father's occupation. Yeah. Most women married in their community. Most people were identified with their nationality. After a couple of disastrous wars and the invention of the car and the train taking us everywhere, anywhere you want to go, a lot of people no longer had an identifiable nationality. They'd been born in one country, been displaced by a war, or their parents had been displaced by a war, they were displaced by another war, and then they find themselves in a whole different situation where they may have a French passport, be living in America, or living in Thailand or Japan or something like that, and married to somebody from another country, and their children, a whole new. So the only thing you've got to hold on is your own. So your own identity comes in more firmly because you're no longer living out of the community identity. So what musical instrument takes its sound source from inside itself? Yeah. There's an African marimba where you've got these pluckers inside a big gourd. Yeah. But the only stringed instrument to have strings inside the resonant space, and this was pointed out by EMI magazine, they did a wonderful article on sounding bowls in 1991. They said the only instrument to have sounds coming from inside the resonant space, stringed one, is the sounding bowls. Yeah. And a couple of other things made them unique in the history of world music. And there's something here about this gift I was given where the image of a string stretched inside the bowl. The logical thing would be put it across the top. There's a lot of work putting the strings through the wall, but it creates something both imaginary and in the sound that connects with the fact that the source of self is now inside the human being and no longer in the community sounding into the soul. It's sounding from within out into the world. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
So, because we're, I'll ask this question. I was going to wait towards the end, but many people are asking questions like, are you the only one that makes these? And how do we get them if we live in America or Japan or somewhere else? Are the shipping costs
So, yeah,
astounding?
a sounding bowl is not a cheap instrument. Yeah. Your guitar, you buy a guitar for 50 quid. You can buy a good guitar for 300 quid. Yeah. A handmade guitar is 5, 6, 7, 8,000. Yeah. You can buy a Chinese violin for 150 quid. A Stradivarius is 5 million, but a good handmade violin is 15, 20, 30,000. Yeah. Sounding bowls are a deed of love. The way in which the wood is cut is already something I've paid attention to from before I started making sounding bowls. What is it that creates happiness in the relationship between the tool and the wood? Because most people only think about what they want to make. They don't think about how they're making it. Yeah, and we're really encouraged in a mechanized society only to think about the goal. But the method of getting to the goal is a whole element that is absolutely crucial, you might say, to the Christ process. Yeah. So what we are with a sounding bowl, I'll tell you this: a Native American shaman came into my studio, and he said, "My guides are telling me that what's happening in here is very unique." And he said, and then he watched me turning, and he said, the shavings that come over that tool are changed. They are no longer what they were when they were part of the wood. Yeah, and it's basically like this: that Steiner describes how the first hierarchy, the thrones create matter as a sacrifice. So, and yet we know that matter is in some senses an illusion. Yeah? If I pick up something and I touch it, it feels absolutely solid. But I don't ask, what is my hand that is touching that? I just assume that my hand is solid. Yeah? But as you probably know, the physics 100 years ago, Niels Bohr was given a Nobel Prize for saying it's not solid. There's actually nothing there. And physics spent the next 100 years trying to prove that there is something there, but we've come down to we have to say no. Actually, every particle of every atom is actually just a wave. But a wave in what? We don't even know whether it's a wave or a particle anymore. It depends how you look at it. These days they call it an event. Yeah. So this is actually a series of events. This in itself is an event. I made it, 5 years ago. In another 20 years, I don't know, 100 years, it won't exist anymore. It's an event. Yeah. So everything that is a temporary manifestation, essentially, of the love of the throne beings. And when you bring your love to their sacrifice, they wake up again. Yeah, they've kind of gone to sleep in matter until somebody shows them real love. And the transubstantiation process is that of showing real love, almost ritualized love for the gift of the throne beings in giving us this illusion of solidity against which we can experience ourselves and come to learn love. And when we give love to matter, it wakes up. And this is what he was talking about. Yeah, if you really touch matter with love, something happens. And this has got, I think, a lot to do with why the sounding bowls have such profound effects. Yes, the beauty, yes, the sound, yes, the harmonics, but also the fact these are carriers of love. And when you put love into the making process, the item that you make carries love into the world. And anybody who makes anything really well by hand understands this. And when you buy something that's been made by machine, it promises to bring you something which in the end it fails to deliver. Whereas if you buy something that's really made by hand, it carries out that promise and it offers you something. Yeah. So sounding bowls are, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, $15,000, depending what sort of thing you're looking for. Yeah. And then there's the carriage on top, which is typically, $200 or $300. But most of them come in these beautiful handmade cases, which are flight proof. Yeah. And there's made to measure for that bowl, and I'll wrap that in bubble wrap and send it all over the world. They've gone to Japan, Australia, Borneo, these places they go from here. But it's not necessarily me who makes them, because though I have worldwide copyrights on this work, which I had to establish because people were creating parodies of it, not just making nice sounding bowls. They were so I had to really protect that and say, look, this doesn't happen unless you train with me. 12 people trained with me, 13 people started training with me, only 5 made it through to the point where they are registered sounding bowl makers. So Ramon and Joe and the others, they also make beautiful instruments, and like the different trees, each of them has got their own character, and these bowls that these people make, I made the first 200 by myself, then Ramon came and trained with me, and Joe, and so on, and we've now got a team of makers. Some of them work here, some of them work in their own studios, and their work is going out around the world, and they are beautiful bowls that these people make. Did that answer the question, Andrew?
It does, I think. There's further questions, just sort of if you could say a bit how you can, do you start with a
rectangular
block of wood?
We start with a tree. So Joe just was here just this weekend. He bought a birch tree, sectioned into logs, and the length of the log is the same as the diameter of the log. Yeah.
Okay, so it's that way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So if the log is lying on the ground, the sounding bowl is inside it like that. Right. Yeah. So you cut the width of the log as the length, and then you section the log into pieces of wood, which then are squares, and then you cut that into a circle and you put it on the lathe. And what the lathe does is just make the wood go round, and it's got a rest there for you to put the tool on, so you balance the tool on the rest and feel the wood until it's in a harmonious relationship and the shavings come streaming over the tool, and you turn your bowl that way. So we turn the bowls until we turn the bowls from the wood while it is still wet, because most wood won't dry without rotting or splitting unless it's given a lot of flexibility. And that might, for a lot of people, that's 1-inch planks, or 3/4 inch thick planks for making furniture out of. They've got flexibility, they can warp, because wood does want to warp as it dries. But what we do is we rough shape the bowl, so the bowl is thicker than it will be at its finish, and then that warps and twists as it dries, and then we put it back up on the lathe and true it up, and we leave just enough extra wood on so that once it's trued up, it's come to pretty much the right dimensions. And then comes the fine work, and the width of the rim has to be incredibly precise. It's fractions of a percentage of the overall width on the rim. The location of these copper tubes through which the strings run, the location of those is accurate to a fraction of a millimeter. Yeah. These tail pins are turned by hand to about to about 5/1000th of an inch, in order to be accurate enough that they will hold into their holes and resist the pull of the string that goes across. And then we have these stainless steel tuning pegs made to measure, so that they will take a wooden head, and then we drill a tapered hole for that to go into, and line that with leather so that you get a smooth action, and so on and so on. Yeah, there's hours and hours and hours of.
So on the bottom are 5 nubs, sort of legs or something. Could you say anything about them?
Yeah, we've got 5 little feet on there. 5 is the number of man, isn't it? 5 is the five-pointed star is the star of Christ, is the star of development, of movement. It's really interesting because in Judaism, the five-pointed star is the star of evil, and the six-pointed star is the star of the human being. Yeah, and they hold the human being in balance through what they call the law. Yeah, the Kabbalah is the law of how to live, and it used to structure, it still does structure, Judaic society. And if you live by the law, you are following your priest's interpretation, your rabbi's interpretation of the Kabbalah. Yeah? And the law has come from this spiritual balance of physical matter and spiritual reality. But Christ opens that up into a movement where not two triangles fixed together, but one line moving around. Yeah. So this creation of movement is fearful to people who to the law, but it is how we who follow Christ learn to develop through this process of change, of changing ourselves. So we have 5 feet on the bottom, and then there's a pattern around the 5 feet where the carving meets the smooth, and that's different on every bowl. Here is sort of a curved pattern, and on the heart bowls we don't carve the outside because they're so thin. There would be a risk of actually carving right through. So this one's got 5 little heart feet, and then it's just smooth from there all the way around to the outside.
Wonderful. So you spoke of overtones, not being a musician or a trained ear. What about the undertones? Could you say anything about that?
Yes. Okay. Great. Yes. So when you tense a string and pluck it, it vibrates at a certain frequency. But when you pluck it, it sends a wave along along the string, which, apart from creating that frequency, still moves a little bit like this. Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever watched waves in the sea or in Chicago in the lake hitting a wall. Yeah. The wave comes up and hits the wall, and then it sort of waves back through the waves which are coming up. Yeah. And these harmonics are encouraged by the fact that we use strings which have got a tense steel wire with a phosphor bronze wire wound around it, and the windings give the string more chance to set up harmonics within its own nature. Yeah, so you get as you say, most harmonics are overtones and some harmonics are undertones. You will get subtones to an instrument, to a string note.
It reminds me, it must be 30 years ago when a biodynamic wine, maybe it's more than 30, won for the first time a wine tasting contest, and then biodynamic wines were winning all the contests, and all the growers started hiring all these BD farmers to grow wines for them. And because those who had exquisite taste capabilities could taste the difference.
Yes.
And I suspect, as you're pointing it out, that there's such a difference in sound that a person with exquisite sound hearing can really experience something that the rest of us experience more unconsciously.
Yes, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yes, it's a bit the same when you're watching a film. Most people just enjoy the film, and some people say, "Oh yes, I've seen that actor do that, and that role, and I see what he's bringing to this role." And some say, "Yeah, I've seen this director's film and that film from the same director, and I see how his influence shapes this film." These are overtones and undertones within.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that analogy. Yes. When you're making bowls, how many failures per 100 or whatever do you have, and what causes the failures? Do you just
Well, there are
fall
failures
out
at different
once?
stages. There are failures at different stages. Um, um, when we rough out a piece of wood into a bowl shape and start the drying process, we lose about 2% of those two splits during the drying process. Once you put a bowl back up and start returning it, you are trying to create a piece of wood that is in perfect balance with the tension of the strings. If you look carefully, you can see that there's a slight up curve from this point to that point, yeah, because the strings are all pulling against this here, and they're pulling this in, which makes it come up a little bit. And you want that to happen, because once the wood is slightly bent, its resonant response is much richer than when it's still perfectly flat. So when you bend the wood, it comes into a more active relationship with the sounds. Yeah? Plus the fact that when the wood is thinner, it's more musically responsive. So the thinner you make it, the brighter the sound becomes. In a sense, the thicker ones have a richer sound, but it's not as alive, and people tend to like the lively sounds. But of course, if you make it too thin, then this bends up too much, and if this bends up more than a tiny percentage, then what happens is the strings actually get more leverage because they're pulling at a higher relationship with if strings are pulling across that. There you've got there's not much. Let's say if you put two fingers together and push very hard, they'll stay straight. But if you put two fingers like that and push very hard, they'll do that. Yeah. So the further the strings come up, because this is moving up, yeah, the more pull they've got, and you'll get one which is just not quite enough wood in here, and then that bends up too much, and it won't handle the pull of the strings. Yeah, so that kind of a failure happens occasionally, not very often. Yeah, but there is so much personality in any musical instrument that to say that one is a failure is uncommon. More often it's just got a certain personality, and somebody will say, yes, I really like that one, I'll go for that one. More than once I've had a bowl and I'm thinking, oh well, and before I know what's happened, somebody says, oh, I love that one. I say, you do? I try and keep the surprise out of my voice, and we play a bunch and they go, yeah, no, that's the one for me. So we are in a living world. This is one of the wonderful things, is that the arts generally, but music particularly, points out that the world is not black and white. Yeah, the idea that things are right or wrong is a wrong idea. The idea that things are right or wrong is part of the aberration of our attempt to create logical thinking in charge of the world. In fact, everything is in relationship with everything else, and we need to let go of the idea that truth is out there and we need to go and discover it. Truth is actually in the relationship between what's in here and what's out there, and we need to enter into it, not go and discover it, but enter into that relationship.
Wonderful way of putting it. Yeah. This last question, I'm going to read it to you. Bonnie writes, have you heard of, and do you think of, Robert Edward Grant's method of precise temperament tuning when you're making these bowls? Do you know of Robert Edward Grant?
I don't know Robert Edward Grant, but the whole question of tempering and tunings is a very flexible one. Mostly you can tune your bowl to your preferred tempered style. So some go for an untempered tuning, some go for Bach's original tempering. Most people go for what they call just intonation, modern tempering. there are many different ways of playing with that, and that is a flexibility. I mean, a bowl like this, well, at the moment, this is tuned into an arpeggio, yeah. But there are two specific other ways that the manual you get with this bowl says you can tune it, and one is da 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 da. You can put it in a diatonic, what's this, 11 to 13 note diatonic tuning, or you can put it into a pentatonic. Bom, ba, 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 ba. Whatever, I can't sing pentatonic just like that at the moment. But there are different ways you can tune any bowl you get. Yeah, this one at the moment is in a pentatonic tuning. But you can retune that into a diatonic. Yeah, with 10 strings on there, you get a very nice diatonic where you get the natural minor and the major in the same bowl.
Thank you. Well, we've run out of time. I just want to remind people, go to soundingbowls, all one word.com, for more about the history and how they're making them. And if you want to order one. This isn't meant to be a sales, but to learn about what this is doing in the sound of music. Yes. In the world of sound and in the world of music.
I'll just add one thing.
Yeah.
On the website, there's various drop-down menus leading to various pages, but there's actually masses of unlinked pages on that site. And if you put a search in there for harmonics, or for meditation, or for wood, or for walnut, or for, there's a whole bunch of articles in the back of that website that light up, Steiner's Basic 7 exercises,
Right. Things that are searchable, but
all kinds of stuff.
You can't navigate to them necessarily, but they're
That's
there.
right.
So
Yes,
use the search to find things. Yeah.
Try searching for pendulum, for example. In the Sounding Bowls website. But there's lots of stuff. So enjoy it. Feel free. Yeah. Dementia. Search for dementia. Or autism, or something like that. You'll get a lot of stuff there.
Yeah. Bonnie said part of her question on Grant is because this tuning system of his resonates with the dimensions and frequencies of the Great Pyramid of Giza and with Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man.
Great, yes. There are two. What I'll just say about this is there are absolute marvels in the history of humanity, many, many that we haven't begun to unroll. Yeah.
Right.
But there are also absolute marvels in the future of humanity, many of which we haven't begun to create. And the question is, how do you balance ancient wisdom with modern creativity? And there's absolutely a role for knowing a lot, and there's also a role for ignoring what you know and playing. Play like a child is a sacred activity, and you can pick up. A lot of people play sounding bowls just like a child. You don't have to play music on them. You can play with them like a child. Steiner said there will come a time where music only needs one note. When I was on Radio 3, the woman there said, "Oh, what I love about these is that they're so harmonious, so simply. Most music has too many notes," she said. A sounding bowl does not have too many notes. Yeah. And there's an article on the website called Learning to Play or Beginning to Play or something, which encourages you just to take one note and explore that. And then when you know that note, find another note which wants to be in relationship with that one note and just play two notes, And they become like lovers, these two notes, the way they play together. And then, maybe a third note, these lovers have a child, and so on. There's play like a child. The music is there to be played with.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, you've got a compliment here. Just amazing and wonderful to see and hear you finally. Another one, one day I'll find my way to you from Scotland, and another deepest gratitude. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
One other thing I'll say as well. There's a YouTube channel. Um,
yeah,
YouTube. .com/. Tobias K will get you to a Sounding Bowls channel on YouTube. There's lots of stuff on there too.
wonderful, wonderful. And I want to say thank you again, Tobias. This was such a pleasure. They're always a pleasure every time I'm with you. And I'm still so thankful for all the work you did making that Tintagel event happen.
That was great,
Um,
wasn't it? Yes. Well, thank you to everybody who's joined. It's lovely to have people coming to enjoy what I make. That's what it's all about. Others enjoying it. Thank you.
yes, indeed. Thank you all, and bye for now.